Hey everybody, welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This week we are talking about the wrentit, and John, Shannon, and Amanda and I are joined again by Kevin Burns. I wasn't that familiar with wrentits before the episode. They're native to California and Oregon, but they are so cool. They travel less than any other bird. They live very close to their nests where they hatch and never venture very far away. They somehow don't really have any close relatives in the US despite that, but are related to birds in Asia. Kevin, John, and Shannon can speak a lot better to that in the episode. They also are a bird that even if you aren't in California, you've most likely heard before. Someone in Hollywood got a hold of a wrentit's call long ago, and now that is the backdrop of many movie soundtracks. This bird is only native to the West Coast and is used in movies that take place all over the world. It's pretty funny. Movie magic. Okay, on to the episode. We had our microphones rolling and picked up some interesting conversation on different plumages, so you'll get a little bit of that before we get into the wrentit. So grab your binoculars and let's get into it. I was curious, Kevin, you said that female plumage is more interesting to study. I want to hear the argument for that because I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm interested.
Well, in at least in tanagers, you have a lot of changes in female plumage happening. You have some that are very cryptically colored and others that are equally as bright as the males. And so there's a lot of evolutionary changes in plumage color happening in females.
yeah. We
In
talked
some
about that, I
analyses,
think.
it's more so than the male.
I talk about that every time I show tanagers to people, that you're just going to get bamboozled by the brightly colored ones when it's actually the females that are doing the evolving.
You can't tell the difference, at least in humanoid, between a male and female, but then others are just, the ones doing more parental care typically. So it's something that Darwin and Wallace argued about, why are males brightly colored? And, Wallace was talking about natural selection a lot and how natural selection altered female plumage. And Darwin was talking about the males and sexual selection. So it's really both.
So it's interesting. We just had a seminar down at University of Chicago by a woman who studies super black. And she was talking about it largely in the context of sexual selection. But again, the tanagers are such a great group that way because they're tanagers that essentially have super black where both sexes have it.
And super black is a new pigment. It's blacker than black. It absorbs way more wavelengths of light, reflects fewer wavelengths of light. And it's spectrophotometers that helped us understand that. Its ability to actually measure color independently that helped us understand that. And looking inside at the feathers, internal parts of the feathers makes us know how super black can get made. But this woman, her name is Dakota McCoy. She's a new professor at the University of Chicago. And I definitely would want her to come on and talk about super black and her research sometime soon. But see, go back 30 years. There was no super black. And we certainly didn't know how these different kinds of black were made. Or not every group can make super black. Why is that? I don't know. Why isn't super black found everywhere? Because some birds, I guess, can't make it yet. Maybe. I don't know.
I think wrentits don't want to make super black.
Maybe not.
That would be a real trick if wrentits made super black. But they would be the cutest bird ever with their eyes making super black like that, with their little runny tails and their tiny tit bodies.
They have a lot of color variation, though. Don't discount them, right? Go all the way from pale brown to dark brown.
I think Amanda wanted to kick off this one by giving a little description of the wrentit. We've been doing a little research. Amanda, do you want to tell us about just what they look like?
Yes, and I'm just writing down what Kevin just said. So just some basics. They're about the size of a song sparrow. They're plump and they have a longer tail and long legs. They're brownish gray, and then to Kevin's point, they can range to dark brown, but they have a paler, slightly streaked belly. And then I thought one of the coolest thing about them is their kind of what Shannon mentioned about their eyes. They have a pale eye with a pupil like us, like a dark pupil. And I thought they look like kind of like a cartoon bird. They're super cute. And they have some light feathers around the eye area. And then their bill is short and slightly curved. But I think, like, just as a new person to this bird, the thing that stuck out to me the most was their pale eye. I thought that made them super cute.
It's the tail that gets me every time.
Oh,
Yeah. And if you, when you guys go to California, you should go and see them.
And that's the eye is really cool, but you got to be close to see that. And they spend a lot of time hiding in the shrubs. They're a bird that's easier to hear than see. And the tail is part of the reason why they got their name. I mean, their name Wrentit is a combination of wren, which also they make a scolding call like a wren. If you read the original description, that's why they were calling it Wrentit. And then tit is part of the titmouse group. Titmouse is an old English word, I guess, for small bird. And so it was originally classified with the titmice and chickadees. And so it was this taxonomic enigma, and that's embedded in that name, and their cute behavior of the tail cocking and the scolding behavior. They're just really cool birds. I just love them.
They really do chatter. It's hilarious. It's like they're constantly nagging either their mate, their children, or the predator, the jay that's coming to get them, or the cowbird that's going to lay an egg in its nest. You'll hear them way before you see them.
And the song, I guarantee everybody on this podcast has heard the song. Most people in the United States have heard the song because it's used on the soundtrack of TV shows, movies all the time, because it's such a common bird in Southern California. I think at one point it got recorded and then just passed around in production studios or something, because it's always in the background. Whether you're in the plains of Kansas, or the setting is supposed to be Missouri or New York City, it's like Wrentit in the background. Very distracting.
And it's hilarious given the size of its range. It has a really small range. Very narrow.
Essentially California endemic, basically from the northern Baja California through California into Oregon. So
wow, and that's it.
But the song is like the song has this, it starts out slow and then it goes kind of into so the male, there's like going to be some introductory notes that are slow, and then it speeds up almost into a trill. It's like a ball that bounces and then speeds up as you get further into the song. And females sing too, but it's spaced out evenly. There's no accelerating of the notes at the end. And they call it the song of the chaparral because you just hear it all the time. It's a really neat song, and I love hearing it. Get excited when I hear it.
Kevin, how did you end up working on Wrentits? So Kevin's done some DNA work on Wrentits with one of his students, and I was wondering how that project came to be.
Well, that was one of the first projects we started when I got the job here in California. And that first student that worked on it, his name is Dino Barham, and he went on to get a MD degree. He's a medical doctor here in San Diego now. But I think I was interested in population genetics and was interested in looking at some local species. And there was a lot of species in California that have a similar distribution to the Wrentit, where they occur kind of in the base of the Sierra Mountains and then down, then up north and then down the coast of California and then into Southern California. And there's kind of like a hole in the middle, which is the Central Valley. So that ring-like distribution. And also they're very sedentary. In fact, some people think they're the most sedentary bird in all of North America. They don't disperse far from where they're born or where they hatch. And so that would be a good idea maybe to get some, when it doesn't move a lot, you can get more genetic differences across the range. And so we got involved for that. Plus we also wanted to try and figure out who their closest relative was. So we launched on that ambitious feat. We got pretty close. We didn't get exactly right, but we got close. And that's, I think, why we got involved in it. We're actually kind of doing that study again now with whole genomes. At the time, we just used one gene of 1,000 base pairs, but I have another student now named Michael Toffmeyer who has whole genomes of across the whole range of the bird. So we're learning even more than we learned that first time around 20-something years ago.
So is that using some of the same samples that were used 25 years ago?
Absolutely. Same samples. And, we have the specimens and everything. So I think this time I have another student that's potentially going to look at color. And so we have basically genotype and phenotype of the same birds. So we can look, now that we have the genomes, we can look at that color variation in the context of the genomes and see if we can
including
find
the eyes, Amanda. Something we
cool.
don't know very much about is how eye color, the connection between the genome and the color of eyes. And there's so much variation in eye color across birds. Trying to understand that's going to be completely fascinating. These are new frontiers, right? The connections between genotypes and phenotypes. But the specimens are always at the base of whatever you do. Doesn't matter how technology changes. A specimen from 200 years ago is still going to contribute to the science that happens today. I love.
We should talk a little bit about this bird from the perspective of why it was interesting to study from a genetic standpoint, given its sedentary nature. And it really is an amazing bird, because if you go and look at, say, an eBird summary of where all the records are, almost every North American bird has some level of vagrancy associated with it. Well, you'll see a record outside of its range. And with wrentit, that literally does not happen.
Wow.
Out of its range might be an individual going a kilometer.
Oh, wow.
From where it hatched to where it sets up its own territory to breed.
The natal dispersal distance is estimated to be 400 meters on average.
Oh, wow.
So that's as far as birds ever go. And a lot of them find pairs like the year that they hatch, and within that year they find a pair and they settle with that pair on a territory, and that's where they stay for their whole life with that pair, unless that mate dies or something. So there's one documented case of a pair staying on the same territory for 12 years.
Oh,
wow.
And that's their whole world.
And so the implication there would be that there would be quite a bit of genetic structure potentially across a distribution that goes from southern Mexico, or from northern Mexico up to southern Oregon. And so that's one of the reasons why it was interesting, in addition to the fact that based on morphology, people had already described some subspecific variation. So you guys found genetic structure, right, Kevin?
We did. Yeah, we did find structure, and we found some general patterns. But interesting, though, comparatively, we didn't find as much structure with that as we did with the California thrasher, which it's co-distributed with. And that could be due to maybe different isolation patterns in the past or something. And maybe the wrentit's just connected the whole time, but just in a different way. It's hard to say why that difference is there. It's something else we're going to try to look at, because we're also doing genomes of thrashers as well. But we found structure, and we were able to tell some of the biogeographic history of it within California. I think that originated in the south and then expanded northward from the south. And at some point there was some isolation a little bit between kind of north of LA and the rest of the state. And that's persistent. We find that with the genome too, looking at the genomes too, which was kind of interesting. Like some of the big findings we found with just 1,000 base pairs of DNA, we found that with the genomes too. So it makes you think, why did I spend all this time and money doing the genomes when some of those patterns were already there with 20 years ago with different technology? But there's more detail. Like we found correlations between environmental variables and aspects of the genome, which we could never do with that one gene sequence.
And then who did you find was its closest relative? Wasn't it somebody that we weren't really expecting that?
Yeah, well, yeah. So right, it's kind of a contrast, right? So they don't move around very much, but at some point their ancestor did, because their closest relatives are in Asia, and they're part of a large clade of I don't know, you'd have to maybe 400, 500 species where they're all in Asia, and the wrentit's in there. And so that's just nuts, right? So at some point it got over there. And then within that big clade, for years they were kind of put with babblers, they're called, and then they were put on their own family, and then they kind of stuck in babblers for a while. But there's been the same kind of reorganization of all of those old world birds that we talked about, the babblers and relatives that we talked about with the tanagers. And so now the babblers are kind of split up. And what we found, and we used tissues that we got from the Field Museum, is that it was related to the genus Sylvia, which is an Old World warbler.
That
now
looks
those
a
have been-
lot like New World warblers, but they're not related to each other.
Yeah, not
either.
related at all.
So
that was kind of what we were able to find 20 years ago. But then people that had more and more stuff, more and more samples. And now the Sylvia is still kind of in there, but it's really related to this group, the parrotbills. So Paradox ornis or Paradox ornithidae is it ornithidae? Paradox something-idae is the family that it belongs to. And all those birds have these like parrot-like beaks. And there's the wrentit embedded within them that's kind of curved like Amanda said, but not a big parrot beak.
But they're not parrots either. So
Oh, no.
get past the common names that people use to indicate relationships.
Yeah. And they were called Paradox ornis because, again, that group, they were like, what are these birds? We don't know what they are. And so they're in there, and then you have all these other things that used to be called babblers in there, but really there's nothing else in North America that's closely related to the wrentit at all. And that's another reason why I just love those birds. It's like,
That's crazy.
how did you get here? It's like the only bird that's type here.
And how long has it been here?
Well, that's interesting too, because the date between that and its closest relative is about 12 million years, which sticks in my mind because that's the same age as tanagers, right? So the tanagers produce like 384 species in 12 million years, whereas the wrentit just was the wrentit in that same amount of time. Maybe there were all kinds of wrentit relatives all over North America and they went extinct, but still, I don't think there were 384 of these. And then the parrotbills who they're related to, there's only like 10 of those or something. So in that 12 million year time period, just wrentit knows 12 parrotbills, or 10 parrotbills. So it's pretty crazy. So it's a total opposite situation as with the tanagers.
Maybe they've gone through extreme population crashes through evolutionary history time to where they didn't ever have a large enough range to break up into a lot of different species.
I think the question is what the hell got them here? Because, I mean, they don't disperse, like John said, so they could have easily like found some new refuge somewhere.
Maybe the no dispersal is relatively recent.
But then should there be more species of wrentits in North America?
Not if they stopped moving right after they got here.
Well, here's where I'm ignorant. I should know this, but I don't know what the other Paradox ornis, how much they disperse. And that's how you would know, right? So if the other Paradox ornis using the tree don't disperse a lot, you would infer the ancestor also didn't disperse a lot. But if they move around a lot, that'd be something.
Amanda and RJ, what you're hearing is the kind of stories that go on in our heads when we're trying to figure something like this out.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
It is. It is.
Yeah, this is how we talk all the time.
It's so interesting to hear what you guys are talking about in real life. But Kevin, is it possible that like someone brought wrentits from, like a human brought wrentits from Asia? Or is it they've been too far? They've been here too long.
Yeah, not 12 million years ago.
Okay.
Humans are really recent. They have an oversized effect on the Earth, but they have not. They're just a tiny blip in the evolutionary history of life on Earth. So,
but so we know that wrentits were on the West Coast 12 million years ago.
Well,
don't.
I guess we actually don't. We do know they split from their closest relatives 12 million years ago, so they could have been hanging out somewhere else in Asia or something, and then that
I see.
ancestor of those right here. But then what happened to the ones that were, what
In
happens to
Asia.
the ones on Asia? They're gone, so
Okay.
it makes more sense that they've been here for quite a while.
Okay.
And it's really kind of southeast Asia when I say that. So they're not, I started thinking, well, maybe they're coming over the land bridge or something and coming down from the north. But I don't think that's likely, given that all their ancestors are close relatives, not ancestors. I don't know why I said ancestors. Close relatives are Southeast Asia, basically, South and Southeast
Okay.
Asia.
I mean, it's an enigma, just like when we talked about kagus and sunbitterns. I mean, that's a crazy distribution too. I mean, what the heck? And at that point, we inferred there could be a lot of extinction because how do these birds do that? How do they get there? Random events happen, I suppose. What did it do? Get out on a piece of land that smashed into, a little island of vegetation somehow that went around the world? Huh.
Tsunami,
Who knows?
something. Set a little piece of debris and a tsunami. Just sit territorially in this little piece of land tsunami that's drifted across the Pacific.
Now that you have genomes, though, you can get an idea of, at least in the recent past, what population sizes might have been like. We can infer a little bit about how much variation there is within a species to understand kind of what its relatively recent past might have been like. But I don't know. It's a bizarre distribution.
It is. And so, we could talk about things like for, 20 million years ago, 50 million years ago, there are birds like hummingbirds that have been found in the fossil record in Germany. So it's pretty clear that there were some major changes in distributions of some small birds. So Kevin's right. There could have been a radiation of birds related to wrentit, and it's all that's left. And that would almost to me make more sense somehow, but we don't have any evidence of it.
And why is it that they don't travel very far either? Is it just they have everything they need? They have a food source, they find a mate, and they don't have any reason to go anywhere?
I think they're probably one of the most common, if the most common bird in the common habitat, at least in Southern California, the chaparral habitat. They seem to do really well, and they have all the food they need. They also like the territories aren't very big, so they must be getting a lot in a shorter distance because their territories are about the size. They average about the size of a football field. If that makes sense, to try to do the math to figure out what it is in terms of football fields, because that's what people understand rather than hectares or something. But the smallest ones are about half the size of a football field, and that's all they need. And the other thing I don't think there's any studies that show this, but it certainly has been our experience doing field work with them is even though their dispersal distance isn't that great, they seem to move into sort of, if there's been a fire and it's been some time and things have been allowed to recover, they seem to move in pretty quickly into that recovered habitat. Or if there's some disturbed habitat, this is true in Oregon. We found them a lot in sort of kind of disturbed shrubby habitats, not really chaparral, areas that were like cut for forest land and then it's grown back into shrubs. They found their way there. So I don't know, that kind of goes against what we've been saying about they don't move very much. So they must be able to adapt to those kind of conditions. But you won't find them in your backyard.
But they often have the babies they produce. They often spend quite a bit of time with their parents before kind of going off on their own. And what role do you think that has played?
Yeah, some probably. They usually stick around for like a month or 40 days. And a lot of times they might sometimes let their young have a territory or a nest within their territory, but that's not common. But often they're adjacent territories, or they might subdivide a territory sometimes. So that might also be important, I think. Like what you're saying, Shannon?
I have a really weird, they bring to mind something I experienced when John and I lived in New York City, which I found New York City the most provincial and the most cosmopolitan place, all at the same time. You found people that had never been out of the neighborhood. They lived their whole life because everything's there. You can walk everywhere in New York City in most neighborhoods and get everything you would need. And then you can walk a little bit, a few blocks, and you can hear 10 different languages being spoken. So, people from all over the world are right around you, along with the people who have never left the neighborhood. And that's what Wrentits kind of remind me of, is that, their relatives, they're all over the world. Well, not all over, but they're nowhere near them. But they don't move either. So
that's a great analogy.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Well, that means something.
I felt that with New York. Everybody thought their street was the best.
Yeah. Well, I used to think there were more people that lived on the street than in the town I grew up in. And that used to blow my mind when I would walk around and think of all of the people in Trail, British Columbia, trapped in like 10 buildings along the street in New York City. Yeah.
And one of the neat things about them is because they're like this, and the territories are small, the nests are actually comparatively easy to find. And so maybe that's easy for me to say, but people have done some long-term studies on them, and they seem to have this perfect combination of being able to live in this habitat where they're not being outcompeted by anything else. And by the time they're young or fledging, the young don't have to go very far to find a territory, because the turnover in adult birds must be enough that they're not having to disperse long distances. And so it really is an amazing situation that they've found themselves in over evolutionary time.
Yeah, do they compete for habitat? Like, are they competitive with, I don't know, fighting with each other, or is it kind of they can all, like John said, there's turnover and they can just kind of comfortably move into where somebody was before?
They definitely defend territories, and they'll sing year round to defend those territories. They're not going anywhere.
Okay.
So they do sing a little bit more in the spring, but they'll sing year round. And then the young will start looking for their territories like this time of year in the fall, after they're kind of fledged and everything. So you'll hear them singing now, and that's what's going on for that. Oh, I said earlier, you're talking about turnover. I said earlier that there's been a pair documented 12 years in the same territory, but the average lifespan of these things is only like 2 or 3 years. And so that could be a lot of turnover, as well as, mom and dad don't live forever, and then you're kind of in the same neighborhood or something, you can move in.
And I think it's interesting in birds like they're superb fairy wrens that have been studied for long periods of time in Australia, which are similar sized and kind of similar in shape and things. And in those birds, the young will hang around and help on the territory, for instance. And then because they can't go find territories on their own, so you get these different strategies across different species of birds for how they're going to do things. And the wrentit, in many ways, has just an incredibly traditional strategy, in the sense that the young apparently go off basically every year and likely find territories.
Oh,
And so
we've talked quite a bit about all of the cheating that goes on in supposedly monogamous birds that DNA has told us a little bit about, or a lot about, but that is not supposed to be happening in wrentits. Wrentits are supposed to be truly monogamous. There's, not very many visual representations of cheating. I don't know if there are any and there have been some very detailed long-term studies by a couple of people, one of whom wrote the account in The Birds of North America. And I think that really shows his in-depth knowledge of these birds, made that account very rich with information and data. So I don't know how to say his last name, but it's Jeff Gepel. I'm not
Gepe.
Yeah, so I good for him. And the other person who studied them for a long time is a woman named Mary Erickson. So, and they actually did so much detailed work on looking at the nests. And so his descriptions I found charming, which the description of how the birds build their nests is super cool, including using that tail to gather up spider webs.
What?
That it then
That's awesome.
that it then puts the spider in its beak, and as it's weaving its nest together. So it has this very elaborate construction of nests. This is not just make a scrape in the ground kind of a nest like so many birds do. I mean, it's very detailed what they do. And I just found his description of it really fascinating. The idea that those tails are used and builds a platform and it weaves sticks together and it uses bark. And do you know if they reuse nests?
they don't. I was just going to say that they can rebuild nests really quickly. So it takes them about a week or so to build the nest, which is, again, given the it's a cup structure, but it's got some neat aspects to it. It left me thinking, as I have been lately, that the genetic architecture in the brain of a species of bird to build a specific nest and put it in a good place is something that we actually know nothing about. And yet it's clear that wrentits have a fairly specific way that makes things work for them really well.
They're not that susceptible to cowbirds because they basically abandon a nest when there's an egg in there and start a new nest pretty quickly. And so even though cowbirds have moved into their territories or habitats, they're not as susceptible to them as some other birds are.
I guess it shows they don't move very much too, because they're so vigilant about cowbirds to drive them away or kick their eggs out if they manage to get close. So maybe that's a benefit of not moving very far, is that you're really around to protect your nests. You're not going very far.
I just want to go back to what Shannon said. I want to give a little more of a shout out to Mary Erickson, who wrote that big monograph on wrentits. And she was, I think, the first, or one of the first, if not the first, female graduate student at Berkeley. And she wrote this big 300-page monograph in the 30s, and then went on to have a good career at the University of California, Santa Barbara, even being like department head there. So that's a really detailed study. It's a pretty important piece of work, even to this day, about wrentit biology.
Yeah, very heavily cited. So think about what she went through to do what she did. It's hard enough in the year 2024 for women to get to that kind of stage of a career, let alone way back then. I often think I'm the only girl in the room many, many times in my professional career, but she was super the only woman around. I mean, good for her. Did you know much about her, Kevin? What was she like?
I don't know much beyond what I just told you. So 1930s, she was there. I maybe want to look more. I want to look more about her though.
Yeah, I didn't have time to do that today, but I wondered if there was a biography or maybe what her obituary might have said more about her, but I haven't looked that up. But if we find one, we'll put it out on social media. We'll put it on Instagram, and once we find her obituary, there's got to have been something written about her.
I had a question about something, and this might not be significant, but I just saw that like chicks fledge after 15 days, but they continue to be fed by their parents for like another 40 days. And,
Wow.
I know I have that, everyone has the image of like ducks and ducklings following their, mom, or geese. Like for a bird like a wrentit, like what does that look like? Are they, because they're not really walking around like ducks or swimming, obviously not swimming. Are they kind of hopping around following their parents just in the bushes? I mean, I would love to see that. That sounds like really cool.
It does.
Not in a little line, but they're certainly nearby and making loud, obnoxious calls, and the parents are feeding in and reacting to those bills. But I think so that the birds like wrentits have kind of altricial development, so they hatch out very helpless and without feathers, and so it takes they have a different path. Whereas the ducks, they're precocial; they hatch out pretty much ready to go, and basically the parents are providing most of the protection to them. And I don't know if they provide them much food other than just guiding them to the right place. So it's kind of two different modes of development for those two kinds of birds.
Okay.
But a lot of the songbirds I see, like not necessarily wrentit, but I've seen like birds on my feeder or whatever, there'll be baby house finches. Like they look as big as the adults and they're still begging. And eventually, and I've seen this with orioles too, eventually the parents just start ignoring them more and more. Just like,
Okay.
give up eventually. Or with the orioles, I see the male and female males kind of migrate early and females migrate early, and the young look kind of lost for a while because the parents are gone and not feeding them. Actually, hope they find their way.
Yeah, when they come out of the nest, that they can't fly. Their wings aren't developed enough, and so they're hopping around for those first few days, being fed by the adults. In addition to what happens after, as they get more flighted. But I think again, it highlights how sort of stable a life history strategy wrentits have been able to maintain through evolutionary time. They haven't been pushed to do much different. Both sexes are involved in feeding, the chicks. And so they're around and helping out until they basically, as Kevin's saying, stop feeding them, and the chicks are then going to go off and not go very far, which is not very typical of a lot of birds.
Especially North American birds, right? Winters, even though California is pretty nice, Kevin has shorts on right now for those of you who can't see him.
I thought you were going to say it wasn't North America.
I have 2 sweaters on and a heating pad and a blanket, but that doesn't surprise anybody who knows me. Yeah. The idea that they really don't have to move very far and there's food year round that doesn't force this kind of migratory behavior is interesting.
Yeah, we do have seasons here, Shannon, whether you know it or not. And especially for the wrentit, I think rainfall is what matters. If there's a good year of rain, and when the rains start, I've noticed this. I don't see this in any of the accounts or anything. At least this is my personal experience. If we get rains early, a lot of them, then I hear the birds sing, and I feel like they're starting to breed like in January and February. Same with the thrashers, but I don't think I think eggs really aren't until March officially, but sometimes I feel like, are they already breeding? Because they just go crazy. And then years when we don't have a lot of rain, things are a lot quieter. So they may have to skip some years when we have drought or whatever. But I was reading like one of the favorite foods of the wrentit during the winter is poison oak berries, like the fruit of the poison oak, which poison oak for you people on the East Coast is like the equivalent of poison ivy. It's like not a plant. It's the plant that gives you that reaction and makes you so itchy. And so I guess I have mixed feelings about that because if the wrentit is helping to disperse poison oak, it's not, maybe that takes them down a peg in my idea, but I'm glad to find a use for poison oak.
But they must be badass too. How do they not have a reaction to that? They touch it with their feet and their beaks and their face.
Yeah. I don't know.
Badass.
That's how they keep researchers from working on them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'll say that I've done fine with poison oak my first like 10 or 15 years working in this area, but not anymore. So eventually, those defenses fall down. So I did no issues when I was working on wrentits, but now I do.
Ugh.
Well, I think we're getting close on time on wrentits. Is there anything else we want to touch on them?
Well, I think it's going to go into the species for the next NCAA bracket.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
I think so too.
Hey, Kevin, how many species of wrentit do you think there are?
Oh, one. Based on the amount of divergence we've seen. Like I actually thought we'd see more divergence when we did population surveys, but it's pretty clearly one.
Wow.
And I think there's 6 subspecies or something like that. And there is some match, not perfect, but some correlation between our genetic variation and some of the subspecies for sure. And so I want to look at that in a little more detail before I make a full pronouncement on that. But yeah, the plumage variation we touched on at the beginning too is a really interesting part of it as well, because down here it's a drier habitat and you get these paler birds. Their bellies are almost kind of, I don't know, a light pink or something. And then up in Oregon, it's just dark brown, and that tied to the humid environment. And that could be adaptive because melanin is, I think we mentioned this in another podcast, or the other podcast, is that melanin also strengthens feathers. And so in a more humid environment, that might help strengthen the feathers and also make a less suitable environment for bacteria to grow, make it stronger against bacteria feeding on the feathers. Not making much sense here, but hopefully you get the idea.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you whether there were any chance that there was a ring pattern around the Sierra Nevadas along the lines of what those plethodon salamanders do.
No, if anything, for the wrentit, we find like 2 groups, and there's a dividing line kind of across between south and north, like north of LA. And we find a similar break for thrashers there as well. And when you kind of model the niches of these birds back in time, it does look like there might have been 2 refugia for the wrentits, kind of Bay Area and then Southern California not too long ago. And that may explain that sort of split that we see. But we don't find what John's referring to is with the salamanders, they have the Institute of salamanders have this ring distribution, just like the wrentit, but they have sort of easy gene flow going up all around parts of the ring. But when it comes down to Southern California, there's very little gene flow. So they're kind of isolated at the ends of the ring, but then throughout the ring, genes are moving around freely. And so maybe that's back to your original question. Maybe I hope to see that when I started working on this, but that's so long ago. I don't remember. I got too enamored by the wrentit in other ways to really do it.
I want to make sure we thank Kevin for coming on because
Yes.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks so
Thank
much,
you,
Kevin.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah.
It's fun talking about something that's not a tanager too. It's pretty cool. If I had to get a tattoo, I don't know if it would be a paradise tanager or a wrentit. So both of those are
Aw.
Oh,
Nice.
you could get both.
You should get both. Yeah.
What about
Temporary
California thrasher?
tattoos.
they could be on the ankle.
Hey, RJ, do you know how to make temporary tattoos?
Oh,
We should
I
make
don't know.
temporary tattoos.
oh, I love that.
I did a really stupid thing when our son was little, and my day home with him, we had temporary tattoos, and I didn't know how they worked. I just thought you just washed them off. I didn't know. And so I put one like on my neck into my face one day home with him. And then at the end of the day, I went to take it off and I couldn't get it off. And I called
Oh,
my
no.
mom. I'm like, what on earth I can't go outside of my house looking like this. And so she suggested using nail polish remover. Well, that didn't take it off. So then I scrubbed my
Oh.
face until it was like raw and red.
Oh,
that
no.
didn't take it off. It had to wear off.
Oh.
I had to
Oh.
walk around
Ouch.
outside of my house with a professional hockey team tattoo going up my neck and into my face. The last time I did that. So,
That's hilarious.
but I might be okay with having a wrentit on my neck.
That's a little different than some hockey
And
logo.
I picked a big one too. It was like
Oh my gosh.
several
That
inches
is awesome.
several inches across too. Uh,
I'll have to see if my brother can print those, print
Yeah.
temporary tattoos.
yeah, for sure.
We may have to put the word rented underneath there, just written, so that people know what it is.
Yes.
Otherwise, I think they'd be pretty stumped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so we don't have a mailbag question this week, but I wanted to make a pitch for an upcoming episode. And so for the past couple of months, I've been super into Moo Dang, the pygmy hippo that everybody's been like
God.
obsessed with,
Uh-huh.
and was like, why can't there be like a bird version of Moo Dang? And then a few weeks later, the universe gave us Pesto, the king penguin chick
Yes.
living in the
Mhm.
Melbourne
That's right.
Aquarium.
Mhm.
And so I've been like tracking all the Pesto news, and it's like been so much fun. But yeah, I was just fascinated with like Pesto growing to be larger than both of his parents, and I feel like that was something we talked about. I know with oil birds, and that must be a common thing with a lot of penguins, right? The chicks actually grow bigger. But it said that I was reading that Pesto grew to be bigger than both the parents combined. So it was the largest
No,
penguin.
That makes,
Yeah.
no, that
That's
doesn't make
what
any
they said.
sense. I don't believe that first.
That's according to the Melbourne Aquarium.
Yeah, well, if they're pulling all of our legs.
Well,
Okay.
Universities.
we should get king penguin biology, because
Yeah.
they have an incredible thing where those chicks end up sitting out in the Antarctic winter it takes them 10 months. And we were just talking about
Oh
how
wow.
long it takes wrentits to do things. It takes them 10 months. So they go through an entire winter waiting for the adults to feed them. Occasionally, it's just standing on these beaches in places like South Georgia. And
Wow.
so, yeah, you may need to be that big in order to literally survive the winter, because you're not getting fed quite as much as you might like to by your parents, I think.
Wow. Well, we still haven't done a penguin episode, I realized too. So do you think King Penguin would be a good first
Oh.
penguin episode for us?
For sure.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, does anyone want to close it out on this one?
There's a lot of
I do.
silence.
I think we should put in a referendum for California to make wrentit the state bird.
Oh, nice.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, I support that. Mhm.
I've been saying that for a while. It's currently the California quail, which is also a nice bird. And you would like the California quail because you know what it says when it calls? Have you heard a California quail call? It says Chicago.
Wow.
Chicago, Chicago, Chicago. You like
That's
that?
awesome.
I could be karaoke, dude.
I'm not sure people who listen are ready for that.
That's awesome.
What's your favorite karaoke song, Kevin? I cannot imagine you singing karaoke.
My favorite karaoke song would be the Wrentit.
Not the California quail.
What?
Yeah, Chicago.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's totally saying Chicago. That's crazy.
But Kevin is not singing Chicago. He copped out and he's playing the bird sounds themselves. That was not
The bird's not-
karaoke.
Well, Kevin, thanks again. This has been so awesome, and you're so kind to come on here and give us your time. Like, this has been
Yeah.
really awesome to have you on and chat with you. And
Weird. Thank
John
you
and-
for having
John-
me.
yeah, John and Shannon have told us so much about you, and it's been such a blast doing these with you. So please come back on.
Yes.
Anytime. Lots more birds to talk about.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us this week. You're all the best. If you're enjoying our show, please tell someone you know about us. Share us on social media or tell your birding group. We're trying to get the word out there and really appreciate any help that we can get. If you have a question for us, you can reach us at podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. All right, we love you all. See everyone next week.